Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I thought we'd turn back to an old favourite topic, which is that about the Russian and Ukraine war. And the reason why I picked this particular topic is that there is something that's slightly bugging me at the moment. Because I'm listening to a lot of commentators, media analysis and so on, and they all seem to be missing something really important. And that particular important and slightly controversial statement I'm going to put out here is that Russia is no longer fighting a military war. Now, no, you might be thinking, what madness is this? What do you mean they're not fighting a military war? They're chucking missiles all over the place and drones, and there's still lots of soldiers dying in the trenches. Yes, those things are true. But think about what Russia is doing. Russia, in launching all those drone and missile attacks, they're not actually firing them at Ukrainian military targets. They're firing them at civilian targets. That's been going on for quite a while, and again, people might say, well, so what? But the whole point is that is really inefficient. It is really wasteful. Russia doesn't actually have that many functioning, accurate missiles. So to be lobbing them at various cities, quite a number of which get shot down by Ukrainian air defences, is extremely inefficient. But they're doing it anyway. And they're doing it consistently. And the targets, again, are consistent. Now, in the earlier parts of the war, people just thought it was a pattern of terrorising the civilian population. And no doubt that was true. But the point is it's not stopped. And it's not stopped even though it's not actually working. So what I kind of come to realise really is that actually Putin already knows he's lost the battle. He knows he cannot win in Ukraine. And this is something that's annoying me because commentators aren't pointing this out. They aren't highlighting the fact that Putin is no longer trying to conquer Kiev or, control more territory. All he is doing is destroying various bits of Ukrainian infrastructure, whether that be energy or agriculture or the grain or anything else. All the Russian army is there to do, in an ideal scenario from Putin's perspective, is to hold the line and thus fix the new sort of border where the army is currently at. That's the best case that he can hope for. The more realistic case, which he is, I'm pretty aware of, is that that army is going to have to gradually fall back through all those massive defensive lines. It'll be slow, but they will be gradually pushed back because the rate of attrition is likely to be quite high. Their logistics are awful. They cannot sustain that battle forever. Ukraine is going to last longer than the Russian army is. So all they're there to do is a delaying tactic. They're there just to hold the Ukrainian military in place, to slow them down as much as possible, whilst Russian Air Force, the Russian Air Force and the Russian Navy basically destroys Ukraine as a viable economy. So think about what that means. That means that Putin's entire strategy now is simply about making Ukraine a non-viable state in terms of, economically speaking, in terms of, not just in terms of their infrastructure and their economy, but also in terms of their demographics. And one of the things that has been commented in recent months is what used to obsess Putin prior to the war was the terrible demographic situation that Russia was facing. And what I mean by that is that more people are dying in Russia than are having babies. So over time, the Russian population is going to shrink. One of the countries worse than Russia for that was Ukraine. So I don't think it's a coincidence that not only are the Russians spaffing missiles all over the place at various things that will stop Ukraine from rebuilding or take a very long time for Ukraine to build, I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time They are depopulating Ukraine of all the young people and babies that they can find. Whether that's through forced deportations, whether that's traumatizing them. The short story is that Putin has taken a short-term fix of removing as many children as he can from Ukraine into Russia to help the Russian demographics, whilst at the same time ensuring that Ukrainian demographics will not be able to recover for at least 20 years. Because think about it, not only has Ukraine lost a number of its children, but a large number of its population, particularly women, have left the borders of Ukraine. They're currently refugees, mainly across Europe. Will they return to Ukraine? Eventually, a certain number of them will, but not all. And Ukraine is not going to be the sort of place that people want to have lots of babies in, I dare say. But that is exactly what Ukraine needs to do. They need an active, younger generation that's going to rebuild a war-torn economy, a war-torn country. And Putin knows that. So his whole strategy now is barely to hold the territory, because he knows that's going to be a struggle. It is literally that on the way out, he is going to make sure that Ukraine is not in any position to be a properly viable, functioning country for a very long time. That is his strategy. And this is the reason why this frustrates me, that people aren't pointing this out. It's because for all Western leaders, whether that's in Europe, whether that's in America, or wherever they are, they've got to think of what that post-conflict Ukraine looks like. Because the reality is Ukraine isn't going to be self-sufficient or particularly functional. I mean, what they've done is incredible, and their resilience is incredible. And no doubt they will carry that over when the war ends, whenever that is. But as an actual country, they will have their identity, but they won't have the infrastructure, they won't have the power plant, they won't have the viable export model of being able to export grain and so on for a very long time. It's going to be extremely expensive to rebuild them. So what's Russia going to do in the meantime? Some people have speculated that maybe Putin will look for this to rebuild the Russian military. But again, it doesn't take much of a genius to figure out that that will be a decade, perhaps even 2-decade long project. He failed to do it in the 6 years since annexing Crimea. He's going to need a lot longer than that to have another shot. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. And money is definitely going to be an issue for Russia. So this is what the Western world kind of needs to think, is that they are going to have to carry Ukraine for perhaps a decade, and perhaps again during that same decade make absolutely sure that Russia as a country doesn't become prosperous. That is not a comfortable thought. That is a very stark geopolitical choice that has to be made. But that is the calculation that Putin is making, is that once there's a ceasefire, once he pulls back, once he finishes arguing and playing hard man and refusing to pay reparations, then people will start buying Russian oil and Russian commodities again. And he can get back to trying to fix some of Russia's problems, safe in the knowledge that Ukraine will just be a bit of a basket case on the border and of no threat to Russia in that intervening period. So of course what that relies upon is the rest of the world, particularly the Western world, is that they have to come to a consensus that that long-term strategy should not be enabled. And right now I'm not seeing that consensus. I'm not seeing Western leaders adopt certain strategies that will not just marginalise Russia in the short term, but actually really marginalise Russia in the long term as the punishment for what Putin has done in Ukraine. And that is not a cheerful thought, but it's an important one. And it's important in the here and now because people need to understand that militarily that is what Russia is doing. So if they want this war to end relatively quickly, there is actually a solution, not a very palatable one, but that is to make the Russian economy rapidly non-viable. And in some ways this is probably what Ukraine are going to start to do, because they know this. They know that is what Russia is doing to them. And they know that they want Putin to agree to a ceasefire. They can't threaten him militarily, although obviously, degrading Russian military is obviously always helpful to them. What they need to do is go after the Russian economy. They need to destroy the ability of Russia to export gas and crude oil and other things that help Russia, make money, basically. And when they start doing that, that is probably the point at which Putin may suddenly decide that a ceasefire is a really good idea. So again, if Ukraine want to adopt that strategy, the question lies in how much support will they get from the rest of the world in terms of doing that. And I suspect the answer, as always, is not very much. People kind of don't want to upset the big Russian bear, not realizing that that is just enabling a future threat that future leaders are just going to have to deal with. So that is my thinking at this point in time. That is my slight realization that for this war to end, things are still going to have to get uglier still. And believe me, the Russians are making things incredibly ugly as it is. But the problem is, we come back to this word appeasement. And I don't use that word in negotiation terms very often. But I do use it in the terms of understanding where you should and shouldn't compromise. Because if you compromise too much, then you compromise your own position, you compromise your red lines. And if you do that, then you're not really going to make a sustainable agreement with the other side, because something's going to go wrong at some point. It always does. And this is what I'm seeing in the whole, treatment of Russia in the Ukraine war. People are trying to compromise to a certain degree with Putin, not really realizing that that is a compromise that won't last. It won't be sustained. And I don't think world leaders have probably realized that and fully developed a strategy for handling it. I'm more of a collaborative negotiator. People know that. I'm not into taking hard lines and adopting binary or oversimplistic positions. But sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to focus on what is important, and that is going to be your priority, even if other things might be a bit uncomfortable or a bit intolerable as a consequence. So sometimes you've got to break down the negotiation into less complicated chunks and just focus on what is important and what is the priority. And I think in this case, understanding what the Russian strategy is and frustrating it has to be the priority, because to do anything else is just an uneasy compromise that will satisfy no one and lead to future problems. Now, I hope you found this negotiation insight a little bit helpful, and I look forward to seeing the comments in the comments box below.